Emrani started to write his book, which is called the Book of Conquest, in Persian Fathnameh, which is the title of, in many ways, of the book of Joshua. And he continued, after commenting upon the stories and the materials that are in the book of Joshua, he moved to the book of Samuel 1 and Samuel 2, and later a smaller portion, which is the book of Ruth. But the major body of the first book that Emrani wrote, which is called again Fathnameh, has to do with the stories of the conquest and settlement of the tribes of Israel within the ancient biblical land of Israel. Fathnameh, written by Emrani, was started when the poet was around 20 years old. We don't know when he completed it, but it seems that in between, from the time that he started his work on the Fathnameh till he completed it, he had moved already from his city of birth, which was Isfahan, and he had moved to the city of Kashan. In addition to this major work, which is in many ways similar to the style and to the structure of Shahin's work, Emrani wrote books and several writings also in prose that are mixed with poetry in three different areas or three different categories. The first category, and which is actually very much representative of Emrani's thinking and of his style, are his works that can be defined as as didactic works. Works in which it deals with the basic principles and concepts of Jewish philosophy and Jewish ethics and ideas and concepts that are part of the Jewish tradition. Within this group, the first group that I call didactic work, Emrani's major work, which contains about 5,000 couplets or 5,000 lines, is called the Book of Treasure, in Persian Ganj-Nameh, which is a commentary on the famous Jewish tractate of the Mishnah, which is called the Tractate of the Avot, or the Pirkei Avot, which is the philosophical tractate of the Mishnah. In this book, Emrani goes verse by verse and interprets the sayings of the Jewish sages as they appear in the tractate or in Pirkei Avot. And again, he uses a variety of sources. Some of those sources come from the writings of Persian classical poets with whom he was familiar. And in addition, of course, he uses a lot of material from the Hebrew Bible and from other works of commentary and interpretations written on the Mishnah and written on the Talmud and written on the Bible by various writers, Jewish writers, from the time of the Second Temple all the way through the end of the redaction of the Talmud. So Emrani was familiar both with Jewish sources and both with Persian and Muslim sources, and he blended them, and he used those sources in his commentary on Pirkei Avot, which he calls the Book of Treasure. In addition to this work, in this category of didactic or philosophical works, Emrani wrote two other works that are also, they fall within this category of interpretations and commentaries on Jewish texts. The first one is Emrani's poetic interpretation of Maimonides, of his 13 principles of faith. Emrani expands on each of these concepts within, as it is defined by the Jewish philosopher Maimonides. And his second work, actually, if we talk about Ganjname together with Emrani's commentary on Maimonides, the third didactic work was a work advice and counsel to the heads of the Jewish community. These works, the three works, together with Fatnameh, they are written in the same style that Persian classical writers use, which is couplets or lines that are divided into two halves. The two halves rhyme together, and each line follows the same melodic rhythm or the same meter. This specific type or category of writing is known in Persian as Masnavi, which means double, referring to the double parts of the line of the poetry. And one of the main reasons is that this specific category of poetry allows the writer and the poet to create long works of poetry, and therefore it is more from the point of view of the writer and from the point of view of the reader, they are much more accessible and more easy to follow and to understand. In addition to Emrani's work in the category 1 that I said were books that were in which we talked about his Book of Treasure, we can define it as an epic or a work of epos that deals with heroic acts of figures and people that were involved in Jewish history in ancient times, together with the first category of epic works, and hand in hand with his works within the category that we call them didactic works that I explained, and in which I refer to his work Ganjname, and his second work on Maimonides, and his work that was a book of counsel and advice and instructions to the head of the community. We also find works of poetry that he wrote based on Jewish midrashim, which are works, which are texts or Jewish texts that deal with characters and figures that are part of Jewish tradition and of Jewish literary past and legacy. Together with these three categories that I refer to, he also wrote some works of some long work of poetry that is devoted to mystical ideas, Islamic mystical ideas, which are called Sufi ideas. And his major work in this category is called Sahi Name, which means the book of the cup bearer, the cup in which you drink the wine. And this is a story, in which the person, which is Emrani, tells the story of his youth and how happy he was, and the days of love and wine and pleasures, and that gradually as he grows, he understands the illusion that is involved in physical pleasures and in worldly pleasures, and he becomes gradually, as the work progresses, disillusioned with the pleasures of the earthly and worldly life, which are parts and parcel of the Sufi or Islamic mystical concepts of the purpose of life, which is ultimately to overcome the limitations of the body and devote oneself to the higher spirits and higher ideals of unity with God. As I explained, the two major and famous writers or poets of the Jewish tradition in Iran, or Judo-Persian literature, are Shahin and Emrani. But from the time of Emrani and after his death, sometime after the year 1536, we know of numerous other works of poetry, both in Judo-Persian and in Hebrew, that were written and composed by Jewish poets of Iran and by Jewish translators and commentators that worked from the 16th century all the way to the end of 18th and beginning of 19th century. I would shortly refer to the names of these poets, and I will offer some, for those who are interested, some sources in case people who want to know more about these topics and about the works of these poets, in addition to Shahin and Emrani. I will refer to some of the major works that have been done and sources of bibliography, so that they can refer to those sources both in English, in Hebrew, and in Persian, and these sources can be very, very useful. Among the major poets, again, we are talking about dozens of Judo-Persian poets, commentators, and writers that came after Emrani in the 16th century, and they continued and they produced lots of works in different categories of poetry and prose. The first one, and the most famous again, is called Khaja Bukharai, the Khaja, which means the master of the area of Bukhara, which is today in Uzbekistan. These areas were part of the larger Jewish Iranian culture. He wrote, his major work is called the Book of Daniel, Daniel Name, which is a commentary on the Book of Daniel. The second poet that is also from this area of Uzbekistan He wrote also in Persian and Judo-Persian. His name is Elisha ben Shemuel. He wrote in the 17th century. His major work is known by its name as Shahzadeh va Sufi, the prince or the son of the king and the priest, which is the story, which is actually a commentary on the story of Buddha, the way it was interpreted by Jewish writers of Spain in the 12th century. The book tells the story, of course, of the prince and his teacher, who is in Persian it's called a Sufi, a mystical master that teaches him the fundamentals of real life. The third one, which is his name is Elisha. His name, if I may, for a second, Binyamin ben Mishael, he was also from the city of Kashan. He wrote lots of short poems, both sacred poetry and secular poetry. In the area of sacred Jewish poetry, he wrote lots of commentaries on what we call in Hebrew azharot, or these are liturgical poems that we read during the holiday of Shavuot, the Pentecost. In addition to those azharot and commentaries that he wrote in Hebrew and in Persian, he wrote lots of poems, short poems that express his own feelings, and many of them are actually love poems and poems that he wrote about his life experiences and his own life history.